You're the future. There is a gentrification that happens to neighborhoods and cities, but there is also a gentrification that happens to ideas. Yes, the world has always changed, but the change that's going on in the world right now is different. This is a change that destroys authenticity. This is a change that erases history. This is a change that creates cultural amnesia. And out there, the wounded spirit of our city cries out, and we are filled, no, not with nostalgia, no. Nostalgia is what they accuse us of when we try to talk about what's being lost culturally in the world right now. We're not filled with nostalgia. We are filled with longing. And here we are, stranded in the before and after.
Once there was a way to get back homeward.
The old has passed away, and the new has not yet come into being.
Once there was a way to get back home.
And when I tell people that the world has changed, people act like I'm talking about some kind of generational thing. They say, come on, Penny, the world has always changed. Penny, New York has always changed. Get over it. If you were 25, Penny, you would think the world is great. She's just bitter because she's old. Come on, Penny, admit it. You're just being nostalgic. But there's a difference between nostalgia and longing. Nostalgia is a wistful, sentimental yearning, not only for the past, but for who we were in that past. One of the ways that nostalgia functions is it protects us from feeling the reality of who we actually grew up to be, the reality of what we settle for. Longing is a persistent sense of loss that attaches to our history, our values, our desires that are not material. Nostalgia is connected to the past, but we, all of us, we long into the future. Longing lasts longer than anything else. I was never nostalgic for the 60s. Come on, all those demonstrations I went to where the police hit you in the head. Generations of people, all ages, linked arms across the planet to stop the war in Vietnam, to fight for civil liberties for all people. But hey, make no mistake, the 60s were violent. I was raped 5 times before I was 18 years old in New York City's East Village during Flower Power. By 1969, New York City was a police state. By 1970, every city across the planet had moved to the right, just like now. I couldn't wait for the 60s to be over. I was never nostalgic for the 70s. The clothes were ugly and made out of polyester, and the music sucked. The backlash against the monsters of evil dissipated, and the beautiful, peaceful, nonviolent anarchist revolution died in its tracks. We were demoralized. Beside that, I was in my 20s in the 70s. Who, over the age of 30, wants to go back to being in their 20s? Only a moron. Only a cretin thinks that their 20s were the high point of their existence. I couldn't wait till my 20s were over. I couldn't wait till the 70s were over. I was never nostalgic for the 80s. That's when the decades started repeating themselves. Yeah, New York City was filled with yuppies, Eurotrash, and trust funders spending their parents' and grandparents' money, just like now. They would slum in our dive bars, our galleries, and our performance spaces. But at night, they would go home to the posh Upper East Side. At least they didn't want to live in our slum neighborhoods like they do now. At least they hadn't raised the rents in every working class neighborhood in the 5 boroughs to $8,000 a month. I spent the 80s taking care of my friends who were dying of AIDS. AIDS is not over. Do not believe the propaganda of the big pharmaceutical companies. They lie to young people. They lie about the side effects of those medicines. They say, go ahead, get infected with HIV. We have drugs to sell you. They lie about what is happening to all of those people who have been on those cocktails for years. Protect your young friends. Protect yourselves. AIDS is not over. I watched 300 friends of mine die like animals. And no, I'm not nostalgic about it. I was never nostalgic for the 90s, the advent of the hipster. Everybody became an artist, and being an artist became an identity instead of something you could actually do. I'm an artist. Great, what do you do? I do a lot of things. In the 60s, I used to tell everybody, if everybody just dresses like us and does drugs like us and listens to rock and roll like us and critiques the government and the corporations like us, well, then the world will be a better place. Well, the hipsters proved that wrong. I was never nostalgic for the oddies, the naughties, whatever you call the 2000s. That's when everybody became an activist, and being an activist became an identity instead of something you volunteered for. Hitting like on Facebook is not activism. Discussing the problems of the world over mojitos is not activism. Come on, people. Calling yourself an activist? That's like calling yourself a saint. An activist is what your community calls you after decades of anonymous service. You can call yourself a Buddhist without meditating, and you can call yourself an anarchist without reading Bakunin, but you cannot call yourself an activist without acting. In the year 2000, I was at the Jaffa Cafe, another longtime cultural landmark here in New York, closed because of gentrification. It was 4:30 in the morning. It was July 2000. Yes, 4:30 in the morning. Yes, in those days when New York had restaurants that were open all night. Not just Greek diners, but other places. with better lighting. I was in there 4:30 in the morning. Steve Zettner was with me, and some of our dancers were with us. And the waiter came over to the table. He had a mohawk, 47 tattoos, multiple piercings, but he was wearing a clean white polo shirt with a little green alligator on it and carefully ironed Gap chino pants. I said, "The way you're dressed is confusing me. What does it mean?" He said, "What does what mean?" I said, "The way you're dressed." I said, "You're sending mixed messages out into the world. The way you're dressed, what does it mean?" He said, "The way I'm dressed? The way I'm dressed doesn't mean anything." That's when I knew that history had ended. I have always lived in the present. I don't want to be who I was then. I want to be who I am now, on the road to who I'm becoming. I was never a brownie. I was never a Girl Scout. I never joined the drama club, the glee club. I quit school when I was 13. I never went to high school. I never went to university. I never went to art school. I never took a women's studies class, a black studies class, or a queer studies class. I don't need theory. I live my politics on the street with my body, not on a velour couch in a student union with 8 other people who took the same class as me. No offense. God bless. I am sex, drugs, and rock and roll. This is what it looks like. This is what it sounds like. You can only get this from somebody over 60 years old. I'm sorry. We saw the good bands. We had the good drugs. I'm not advocating drugs because you can't get good drugs. But as I stand here, as I perform this in front of you, as I look into your eyes, as I feel you in the room, as I feel you out there in cyberspace tuning into this program, I know that you don't have to be the same age as me to be worried about the same things I'm worried about. I know you don't have to have had the same experiences as me to think about the same things that are going on in the world that I think about. I stand here and I can feel you. I see you. I know that I am not the only one. Thank you.
This has been Arcade, ladies and gentlemen. Yes.